Hey everybody, I wanted to talk to you today about lesson 3.5, and it also will help you with IXL Y3. And this is the lesson about making a system of equations out of a word problem. And IXL, we use graphs to figure out the answers to some questions. So we're going to take a look at an IXL problem from this section and talk through what you need to do. This problem right here starts off telling us that Mr. Santiago owns 2 car dealerships and he wants to see which one can sell the most cars. And Clarksville Cars has already sold 15 cars. Santiago's has sold 10 cars. Going forward, the salespeople at Clarksville Cars think they can sell 1 car per day, whereas the salespeople at Santiago's Autos are aiming for sales of 2 cars per day. Alright, we need to look at this word problem and find 2 things for each equation. We're going to have a slope and we're going to have a y-intercept for each of our equations. So in this problem we have 2 equations that we're going to make, and one of them is Clarksville Cars, the other is Santiago's Autos. So let's start by trying to find the slope and y-intercept for Clarksville Cars. Our first step is finding the starting amount. How much did they start out with? So Clarksville Cars has already sold 15 cars. That's going to be the y-intercept, our starting amount for Clarksville's cars. So we're going to put our dot at 15. That's our starting amount. Now the second thing we need to find is the slope, and that will be the amount of y per x. When you look at the y-axis, it's cars, the x-axis is days, so our slope will be the number of cars per day. And Clarksville Cars thinks they can sell 1 car per day. So our slope for Clarksville Cars looks like it will be 1 over 1. Okay, there's only one circumstance where we wouldn't just go up 1 over 1, and that's if the lines on the y-axis are going by different amounts than the lines on the x-axis. But in this problem we have the y lines going up by 5 and the x lines going up by 5. So we just use our slope of 1 over 1 and we make a second point for Clarksville Cars. Now to make our line for Santiago's Autos, we'll find the starting amount. So Santiago's Autos has sold 10 cars to start out. So our point goes at 10. And then their slope, the amount of cars per day, is 2 cars per day. So Santiago's Autos slope is 2 cars per day. And since we have the same numbers for each line for the y and the x axis, then we just use our slope of 2 over 1 for Santiago's Autos. And so our next point would go right here. And there's our solution, the point where the 2 lines cross. So the question is, how many cars will each lot have sold? And we have to look for the number that goes with this dot on the y-axis, the cars. So it looks like they would reach the same amount at 20 cars. We'll look at another one real quick. First of all, looking at the y-axis and the x-axis, they're both going up by 5 for each line. So we know again that we can just use our regular slope over 1. Alright, unlimited trips. This one has a little bit of a different scenario. This one has an amount that you can pay for unlimited trips, and no matter how many trips you take, you just paid that same amount. So it says she can pay $35 to go on the water slides as much as she wants. And if it's an unlimited amount, then we're just going to have a horizontal line that goes along the number that they have to pay. So $35 for unlimited trips would look like this. That means if they went on 10 trips, then it was $35, and they could go on 50 trips or 100 trips for the same amount. Okay, our other option is pay per trip. And so let's find our starting amount. To get in, she automatically has to pay $15. So that is our starting amount, the amount that we have to pay right up front. And then $2 per trip would be our slope, dollars per trip. So let's make our line for the amount per trip, starting at $15 and going $2 per trip up to over 1. So our lines cross each other right here, and the question is, how many trips would that be? So the line that matches up with that point is 10 trips. So this scenario had an unlimited amount, which gave us a horizontal line. Okay, now we've come to one of the problems that I think is the most challenging for people as they're doing these problems in Y3. And the difference with this is the y-axis lines are going up by 10s, but the x-axis lines are going up by 5s. So here we have a little different scenario. What we're going to do, we'll still find our starting amount, which is the y-intercept, and put our dot there. But since the lines for the y-axis are not the same as the lines for the x-axis, here's what we do. Looking at the first person, Gwendolyn, I'm looking at the information for her. A one-time setup fee of $20 would be the amount that she has to pay up front. That's our y-intercept. So it's supposed to be pink. And then $4 per box. So there's our slope. Now normally a slope would be 4 over 1 if these were going by the same amount. But here's how we find how to make our slope with this problem. What we do here is we figure out how many times bigger the y-axis is than the x-axis. And in this case, 10 is 2 times 5. So we know that the y-axis is 2 times bigger. And what we do is when we find our slope, instead of putting 1 on the bottom, we put this number, how many times bigger it is. So looking at Gwendolyn, her slope is 4, and instead of the slope being 4 over 1, Gwendolyn's slope will be 4 over 2, which is the number of times bigger 10 is than 5. Alright, so let's graph that. Gwendolyn starts at $20, and for our slope we're going up 4 over 2 because this is 2 times bigger. Okay, let's look at LaToya's information. LaToya has to pay $5 per box. And there is no setup fee, but she had to pay $10 for shipping, which is a one-time automatic price. So our slope would be $5 per box. Our y-intercept would be 10. And LaToya is going to start out here. Now instead of our slope being 5 over 1, just like we did with Gwendolyn, we're going to make our slope for LaToya 5 over 2. And the 2 comes from the fact that 10 is 2 times as big as 5. So let's graph the next point, going up 5 over 2. And there we have a spot where they cross each other. So the amount of money at that spot is $60. So just to review, when we had the y-axis going up by 10s and the x-axis going by 5s, we put 2 on the bottom of our slope because 10 is 2 times as big as 5. Alright, here's another good example. When we look at the y-axis, the lines are going up by 10s. The x-axis, the lines are going up by 1s. So, how many times bigger is the y-axis amount than the x-axis? That's right, if you're saying it's 10 times bigger, that is correct. So, what number will we put on the bottom of our slope? 10, because the y-axis is 10 times bigger. Alright, let's do this. Professor Lawson, he has already finished grading 10 assignments. So that will be his starting amount. And he's grading 4 assignments per hour. So that will be our slope. And for the teaching assistant, she grades at 5 assignments per hour. But she hasn't started yet. She doesn't have anything to start out. Alright, so how would we graph this? First of all, Professor Lawson starts at 10 assignments. For Professor Lawson's slope, we're going to go up 4, but instead of over 1, we're going over 10 because the y-axis is 10 times bigger than the x-axis. And we can graph that, or we could reduce it to 2 over 5. 5 assignments per hour for the teaching assistant would give us a slope of 5 over 10. Okay, let's graph this. Professor Lawson started at 10, going up 4 over 10. And the teaching assistant started out at 0. She just came in. So starts with 0 and goes up 5 over 10. And the number of assignments where the lines cross is 50. So once again, we found out how many times bigger the y-axis is than the x-axis, and we put that number on the bottom of our slope instead of 1. Okay, this will be my last example. So one more time, we're looking at the y-axis, and it goes up by 50s, and the x-axis goes up by 5s. So how many times bigger is the y-axis? The y-axis is 10 times bigger again. So that means the number on the bottom of my slope will be 10. And looks like we have a soap making business, and Alice, originally she starts out by spending $50. That's how much she pays right up front, and the soap costs $8 per pound, the amount of dollars per pound, Y per X. So Alice starts at 50 for her costs, and her slope would be up 8 over 10 because the y-axis is 10 times bigger. And her sales, she sells the soap for $9 per pound. How much money would she start out making if she sold 0 pounds of soap? That's right, she would make $0 for 0 pounds of soap. So we start there, and $9 per pound, we're going to go up 9 over 10. So where the two lines cross is 50 pounds. Well, hopefully that gives you a secret that you can use to graph the equations in this IXL section a lot more easily, especially if the numbers for the y-axis are different than the ones for the x-axis. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to write these steps down over here, and good luck with these problems.